She swore she'd never hate him. He walked into the death labyrinth in her place. And from the other side of the door, she smiled and told him that was just the easiest way to get rid of an idiot. But let's start from the beginning. At school, Junpei is surrounded by a small group of boys, and the atmosphere is tense. Junpei quickly apologizes to Kido-kun and admits he still does not have the money. The others dismiss him at once, saying an apology means nothing if he still cannot pay. Kido reminds him they agreed on 50,000 for today and pressures him over the missed payment. As Junpei is grabbed and struck, Kido coldly tells him that if he cannot produce the money, he should go steal it. Kido smugly decides that if Junpei cannot pay, they can at least make him suffer for it. Junpei trembles as Kido demands compensation worth the full 50,000 yen. While Kido and his friends crowd around him, Junpei bitterly thinks this cruelty has become his daily high school life instead of the peaceful youth he once dreamed of. In the middle of it, Junpei all of a sudden notices someone and asks what she is doing there. A girl named Tatsumiya Noriko appears, and Junpei blurts out her name in shock. Noriko looks on with concern while Junpei, battered and shaken, forces a strained expression at her sudden appearance. One boy complains that Noriko always gets in the way and says this would have gone much smoother without her, while another mocks that saving Junpei again would be pointless. Ignoring them, Noriko grabs Junpei and firmly tells him they are leaving. As the boys laugh and remind Junpei not to forget the money again, Noriko walks ahead in silence and another student watches the scene with a troubled expression. Noriko leads the way down the corridor while Junpei trails behind, exhausted and crushed by humiliation. Junpei tells her it is fine and insists this has nothing to do with her. But Noriko cuts him off and says that just because he is her childhood friend does not mean she can stay out of it. Noriko hesitates, then tells him he may have forgotten. She reminds Junpei that a long time ago, when she was the one being bullied, he was the one who saved her. Noriko steadies herself and says that is exactly why she cannot turn a blind eye to this. As she reaches out to him, Noriko tells Junpei that he is actually a very strong person, and he quietly says he understands. Noriko gently tells Junpei that even if everyone else hates him, she never will. Junpei looks at her in silence, and she asks him to let them carry this burden together. As Junpei lowers his head, he says he understands and realizes that nothing will change unless he changes first. Holding on to that resolve, Junpei decides that for Noriko's sake he has to change, even if only a little. He all of a sudden steps forward and declares that he changed his mind and wants his money back today, leaving the boys staring at him. The confrontation flips in an instant as the lead boy recoils in confusion and Junpei himself is rattled by the sudden reaction. Noriko and the others are shaken as a strange disturbance erupts, and she blurts out in alarm as she demands to know what this is. In the next moment, the group is swallowed by an unnatural blank space as the world around them disappears. Standing together in stunned silence, Junpei, Noriko, and the others can only stare ahead in disbelief. Completely disoriented, they struggle to understand what just happened and ask where they are. A strange boy appears in the empty space, casually introducing himself and saying he will explain the situation. Junpei, Noriko, and the others stare at him in shock, unable to process his sudden appearance. One of the boys clicks his tongue and demands to know what he just said, while the newcomer only smiles back. As the group rushes toward him, one boy furiously demands an answer about where they are. The long-haired boy says he at least understands the reason for their reaction, still trying to confront the stranger. The newcomer calmly says that even so, their attitude is annoying, and his tone all of a sudden turns cold. In an instant, the long-haired boy is struck down, and the moment turns deeply shocking as he cries out in pain. Before anyone can react, the attack kills him and the others freeze in horror at the sudden death. The boy wears a satisfied smile as the scene turns grim, while Noriko and the others stare in stunned disbelief. Junpei touches his face, sees blood on his hand, and can only mutter in confusion as the reality of the attack sinks in. Junpei's thoughts spiral in horror as he tries to grasp that Kido has been killed and the scene is too awful to process. Noriko screams in panic while Junpei recoils beside her, both overwhelmed by the sudden shock. The situation becomes uncomfortable. The pale boy calmly declares that he is the creator of the world they live in and, in other words, calls himself a god. He explains that he was originally human too, but says it has been 3 billion years since he became a god, adding that he may once have known the exact number before losing count. With a casual smile, he says that even gods have troubles, and gives one example by stating that they cannot die. He says that is exactly why he needs ways to pass the time, adding that he is bored and has far too much time on his hands. He reveals that this time he chose a new way to entertain himself by transferring people like them into another world. The group falls completely silent, and Junpei realizes no one can even speak in a situation this bizarre. Smiling faintly, the boy explains that his world exists within another dimension and identifies it as a so-called beta fantasy world. The pale boy explains that in the old world, kings used summoning magic to call in the heroes they wanted, and says he has now permitted that same summoning magic only for people like them. A girl nervously admits they still do not understand what is happening, her voice shaking with uncertainty. She desperately begs to be allowed to go home, saying they only want to live normal lives. The pale boy stares back in open disbelief, clearly caught off guard by her plea. The girl tearfully asks why they would not be returned home and demands to know whether they were even listening to his explanation. He coldly reminds them that he already said he was bored. One boy is disturbed by the look on his face and thinks that expression is nothing like a god's, but more like someone completely broken. Another boy notices that Kido's friend is also trying to make sense of the situation despite the growing unease. Junpei decides he will question only the parts they can still understand for now. As a strange screen appears before Junpei, the pale boy casually tells him to continue the explanation and asks whether everyone can see the status display in front of them. The pale boy explains that levels, ability points, and other values are standard in the world they are being sent to, while Junpei stares at the display in tense confusion. He adds that an average person in that world usually has around 50 HP and 20 AP, using an armed villager as a simple example. Using that reference, Junpei realizes Kido-kun's displayed values are far beyond normal, and the pale boy casually remarks in approval. Seeing Kido Shota listed as a level 1 magic warrior, with unusually high stats and an appraisal skill of the highest class, Junpei is stunned and starts to think Kido might actually be absurdly strong. The pale boy confirms Kido-kun's skills are indeed exceptionally impressive. Kido admits he still does not think he is as good as Junpei, while another student asks what kind of status Junpei has, and someone else questions what the phrase ultra-grade even means. The pale boy explains that appraisal at the ultra-grade level is a special gift he has granted to all of them. He tells them to use it well and explains the ranking system, from beginner to skilled, master, hero, and ultra, adding that ultra-grade is the highest skill rank and serves as a bonus after the game begins. Kido leans towards Junpei with eager confidence and asks to see what Junpei's own stats look like. The others crowd around at once, demanding to see, while one boy laughs and bluntly says this guy's numbers are seriously unbelievable, leaving Junpei awkward under the sudden attention. Junpei's status screen reveals a brutally plain result, showing no job, level 1, low basic stats, and only an ultra-grade appraisal skill with many empty skill slots left. As Junpei stares in disbelief, someone laughs that he does not even have a job and calls his result completely empty, making him sweat under the ridicule. The pale boy points out that having no job and no attribute color means Junpei is free to choose whatever skills he wants, leaving Junpei startled. The explanation continues that people usually gain skills according to their level, but Junpei's case is different. The pale boy says that if Junpei wants skills, he would have to defeat enemies and take their skills for himself. Hearing it framed that way, a girl reacts in surprise and says that actually sounds like an amazing ability, while another agrees he has a point. The pale boy smirks and says he figured as much, implying that this is exactly why Junpei stands out. With a confident grin, he tells Junpei that this means he must defeat enemies by himself and asks if he thinks he can do it, while Junpei quietly notes that strong enemies with rare skills are scarce to begin with. The pale boy casually says that simply giving them an impossible game would be boring, then hints that he has something else to tell them. He reveals there is a labyrinth filled with abnormal monsters, and adds that there might be something there Junpei would want, leaving Junpei shaken by the ominous image. Junpei hesitates and quietly calls out to Noriko, drawing her attention as his unease begins to show. Noriko warns that Junpei, Kido, and Hina are treating this other world like a game, and says that after this they could all die because things may soon turn truly ugly. Junpei admits with a strained voice that he has been thinking the exact same thing. One boy argues that they still have no choice but to rely on Kido, pointing to Kido's status and insisting he is the best among them. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. Junpei freezes under the pressure and can only stare ahead in alarm as her words hit him. The pale boy abruptly rallies everyone and sends them off, while Junpei and the others recoil at the sudden move. He singles Junpei out as the jobless skill hunter and says he cannot wait to see what Junpei will do in the future. With a chilling smile, he tells Junpei he is looking forward to watching what comes next for him. A status window appears for Tatsumi and Noriko, showing that for now she is also a level 1 villager with no job, and the farewell leaves Junpei with a grim sense of what lies ahead. The pale boy declares that he is the creator of the world they live in, and in other words calls himself a god. The curse deepens its grip on her condition. Junpei works with a shovel under visible strain, forcing his way through the labor with sweat on his face. Noriko calls out to Junpei and gently asks if he has a moment. Junpei answers Noriko and says it has been a while since they arrived in this world, and that he will be there in a second. A figure explains that they had been summoned by the king of that country, while the battle forces of other nations were also made up of heroes. Junpei learns that the king had high hopes for them, but after they kept losing, he gave up and cast them aside as useless trash. He realizes they were dumped on the dirt road outside this remote village, effectively banished from the capital. It is explained that the villagers had looked at them coldly because they arrived during a famine and became extra mouths to feed, though at least they were able to eat every day. Looking over the bleak village, Junpei resolves that he has to change himself for Noriko's sake. Junpei freezes, then blurts out in disbelief that they are talking about a sacrifice. Noriko quietly confirms it. She explains that the famine was caused by a nearby labyrinth and that the village has been forced to offer sacrifices again and again. Junpei asks if that has anything to do with them, but Noriko says the villagers are bound to it too. Noriko says it is true that they are outsiders, then bitterly adds that her status is the lowest of everyone there, leaving her feeling completely worthless. As they walk through the woods, she explains that the sacrifices are not voluntary, and that she is simply the one most likely to be chosen. Noriko says the village elder has already made the decision, so she feels like she has almost no choice left. Junpei desperately tells her there has to be another way and insists she should just run. Noriko refuses, saying that will not work because they were sent there under the king's command. She warns that if they flee, they will be treated as criminals, and with nowhere to run in this unknown world, getting caught would mean death. Noriko forces a smile and says that just because they call it a sacrifice does not mean she will definitely die, insisting it will be fine. She explains that being chosen as a sacrifice only means being thrown into a labyrinth full of unknown dangers, then firmly declares that she will not die. Junpei is shaken to the core, then silently hardens his resolve that he will survive. Clenching his fist, Junpei rejects her decision and tells Noriko he will never allow it. He declares that if someone must be sacrificed, then it should be him instead. Noriko all of a sudden hears a rustle nearby and turns in alarm. A man steps from the trees, startling them, and Noriko recognizes him as Kido as he apologizes and admits he overheard everything. Kido explains that he thought joining the village vigilante force had ended his bullying, but ever since arriving in the village, he has looked troubled again. Junpei stares in shock as Kido says he has changed ever since coming to this place. The effect of the spell pushes her past her limit. Kido lowers his head and awkwardly admits that he is sorry for bullying Junpei, leaving Junpei speechless. As Noriko starts to say that she will be the sacrifice and suggests they may need to run after all, Junpei right away cuts her off with a fierce refusal. Junpei, sweating and shaking, declares that he will go in her place. Kaido and the others react in alarm as Noriko calls Junpei's name. Junpei recalls Noriko saying they had to do their best together, and he reveals that from that moment on he kept forcing himself forward because he wanted to change for her sake. Through tears, Junpei insists that he will definitely survive and that he refuses to die. He says that is why they will definitely meet again afterward. The group moves together through the labyrinth with Kido leading, and beneath them dangerous terrain stretches out with strange creatures and hazards in every direction. They arrive at a rocky area, and Junpei notices that the place they have been searching for lies just ahead. A dark doorway carved into the cliff comes into view, looming like the entrance to the trial waiting for them. Junpei stands at the dark entrance with the others behind him, and the group falls into tense silence as they face what lies ahead. He steps into a vast ruined passage while Noriko follows behind, making it clear that they have crossed into the dangerous labyrinth. Kido says the white line seems to mark the entrance, then hesitates and asks Junpei one last time if he is really sure about this. Noriko, clearly worried, starts to offer to go instead, but Junpei right away refuses. Junpei turns back and asks Kido to take care of Noriko, and Kido quietly accepts despite his grim expression. As Junpei crosses the boundary, he realizes that from this point on he will be inside the sacrificial labyrinth, and he wonders if he will ever make it back alive. Even while fear grips him, Junpei forces himself onward and insists that he cannot die, because he has to survive for Noriko and for everyone watching him off. Noriko softly calls out to Junpei, and her voice stops him in his tracks. With her face lowered, Noriko explains that in this world there is a labyrinth full of ravines and gaping holes. She adds that it all of a sudden appeared thousands of years ago, caused countless disasters, can also be called the Terrible Labyrinth, and says that a few famous adventurers once dared to challenge it. Noriko reveals that none of the people who entered ever came back, and Junpei is left shaken as he calls her name. The explanation turns grim as they state that saying someone will return alive is simply impossible because the survival rate is 0%. Junpei asks what Noriko is talking about, and she explains that magical research institutions observed this labyrinth and reached a certain conclusion about it. They explain that this labyrinth is close to the village, but once someone steps through the entrance, that person is no longer in this world and is sent somewhere else. With a disturbing smile, they reveal that this place is known as the sacrificial labyrinth. The moment all of a sudden turns wrong as one of them gets far too close, making the atmosphere instantly uncomfortable. Junpei is utterly stunned, and his mind blanks as he blurts out a confused reaction. The dark entrance looms behind them as they laugh and declare that the whole attempt was a huge success. Smiling as if this were all a joke, they apologize to Junpei and admit they decided to go along with the others this time. They coldly add that since the sacrifice was not going to happen willingly, they chose to play a trick on him instead. With a mocking look, he says it would have been boring if Junpei had simply run from becoming the sacrifice. Noriko calmly adds that it was true the village had already asked her to serve as the sacrifice. Another boy nervously admits that was why he and Kido came up with this plan. The exchange turns deeply unsettling, as she says this is the only way Junpei can still be useful to her, and another voice casually claims the idea was actually his. As Junpei recoils in shock, she tells him he still does not get it, saying that even if they have the same stats, the situation has changed. Junpei trembles and realizes it was all a lie, then asks Noriko if she had not said she would not hate him. Noriko confirms that is true and bluntly says she does not hate him, but she does not like him either. Through tears, Junpei asks what happened to their promise about protecting and helping each other. Noriko laughs and explains that she only said those things because they were still inside the safe zone back then. With a cold smile, she says Junpei should have understood once he saw how things really were, because those words had meant nothing from the very start. Noriko stares at Junpei in disbelief and says he had really volunteered to become a sacrifice in her place. She coldly tells him he is kind, but adds that kindness cannot solve every problem, and says there is a more realistic way to see this. With open contempt, Noriko snaps that Junpei is just an idiot. Junpei breaks down completely, crying as the betrayal crashes over him. A boy mocks him for hearing her answer and viciously tells Unpei to go die in the labyrinth. Junpei jolts in shock as the words slam into him. Realizing the danger around him, Junpei looks up in alarm and notices a wall. One of the boys smirks that they will be running away now, boasting that with his status, even the village's best pursuers could never catch them. Noriko and the others grin as they say goodbye to Junpei, and one of them adds that this will be the last time he ever gets bullied by them. Junpei stares ahead in stunned rage and heartbreak as they thank him for giving them so much trouble. Junpei loses awareness of everything that happened after that moment. Even without understanding anything, Junpei says he just kept walking until he finally noticed a door. Junpei opens the door and steps through with a hardened expression. On the other side, a terrifying skeletal reaper-like monster stands before him, gripping a massive scythe. Junpei says his mind had been a blur until then, but the instant he saw that creature, his hazy thoughts snapped clear. Faced with the monster in the ruined space, Junpei recoils in shock and wonders what it is. In panic, Junpei remembers his appraisal skill and realizes that skill was the gift given to all of them. The appraisal reveals the monster is the No-Life King, an undead king with danger level SS, a corpse possessed by a demon whose fragile body can nullify attacks with dark particles, making normal strikes completely ineffective. Staring at the result, Junpei trembles and wonders what a danger level of SS is even supposed to mean. Overwhelmed by the appraisal and the monster's presence, Junpei stands frozen before the impossible threat. The No-Life King all of a sudden swings its massive scythe at Junpei, hurling him into immediate terror as the monster closes the distance in an instant. Junpei cries out and throws himself away from the blade while the Reaper-like monster keeps attacking without hesitation. The strike hits him and sends him flying, and Junpei cries out as he is launched across the ruin. He crashes into a heap of bones and broken debris, tumbling helplessly through the remains. As Junpei lies there in shock, he sees the monster's silhouette in the distance and realizes it is still coming for him. Looking at himself in disbelief, Junpei realizes he is somehow still alive, then notices that his wound is already closing. Surrounded by bones and jagged formations, Junpei stares around in confusion and wonders where this place even is while the healing continues. He spots a nearby slate-like object and reaches for it, sensing it might matter. After examining the slate, Junpei admits he cannot read what is written on it and is left puzzled. Before he can think any further, a wrapped skeletal figure all of a sudden appears and cheerfully greets him, leaving Junpei jolted in alarm. The skeletal figure welcomes Junpei to the so-called crazy dungeon, asks how he is holding up, and says he will explain everything because this is a place they cannot stay in for long, adding that it is advice from an adventurer who came here before him. Junpei hurriedly introduces himself, says his level is around 200, and insists he is actually strong since the world's strongest swordsman is around level 300 or so. The figure says the skills he should have are retrovision and appraisal, and explains that those abilities are how he managed to conquer the dungeon, while Junpei instantly realizes this place is bad news. The figure reveals he saw that monster the moment it appeared, and warns that because the area is so narrow, it will find Junpei right away if he makes any noise. As Junpei sits among bones and debris, he thinks a place where monsters ignore all wounds and keep existing in the dungeon is terrifying, though he also notes that this area seems to function as a safe zone. The figure all of a sudden shifts the topic and points out that he is talking about that monster. He explains that the creature's description says normal attacks are completely ineffective, and Retrovision confirmed it, while even its scythe can nullify physical and magical attacks, leaving Junpei shaken by how absurd it is. Staring tensely ahead, Junpei can only wonder what that thing really is. The figure tells Junpei to stop worrying about that monster for the moment and focus on gathering useful information about the people who came after him. Junpei is caught off guard when the figure says he saw several people get defeated through retrovision. The skeletal figure explains that whenever the monster appeared, a huge blast always broke out in the middle of the fight, so he never saw how anyone actually defeated it. Junpei falls silent, then accepts that this is exactly why he has to get out of here. The figure tells him to run for his life, then points east and says he will find a door with stairs leading to the next level. The figure adds that even if this area feels safe, Junpei will starve to death if he stays here, then abruptly says goodbye. Junpei notices the old man somehow managed to steady him, and though still rattled, he begins to calm himself. Remembering he has only one path forward, Junpei decides he has no choice but to move and concludes he should trust that man for now. Studying the rocky wall, Junpei judges that he should be able to climb up using the pillar. As he stands among the bones, Junpei tells himself that once he gets up, he will have to sprint for the exit, and even though he has no idea if it will work, he knows he has no other choice. He hardens his resolve and decides that if he can just survive this, nothing else afterward will matter. Junpei all of a sudden pauses and remembers he has used appraisal before, then checks the no-life king again and sees it is an SS rank undead whose dark particles nullify all normal attacks, while its attack and defense are strangely low despite that overwhelming power. Junpei trembles in confusion and realizes that if attacks are useless against it, then calling the monster weak makes no sense. Staring at the shattered wall, Junpei tells himself that the decision he makes now will decide whether he lives or dies, and he forces himself to think fast. He recalls that the monster's HP is low and its body is fragile, yet it cannot be killed because it has a skill that nullifies attacks, leaving him frustrated and forcing himself to choose. Junpei remembers the letter and concludes that if what it said was true, then there has to be some way to kill the creature. He pieces the clues together and considers that in the middle of a chaotic battle filled with explosions and area effect magic, the monster's attack, nullifying ability somehow stopped mattering. A sudden realization hits him, and he reacts in shock. Looking over the bones and rubble, Junpei concludes that defeating it during a massive chaotic battle with area attacks is definitely possible, and the pattern finally starts to emerge. Even after reaching that conclusion, he grimly admits that with only himself here, creating that kind of chaotic battle is impossible, and he is left wondering what to do. As he studies the surroundings, a new idea starts to form, but he right away stops himself and rethinks it when he notices the situation more carefully. Junpei all of a sudden realizes the answer had been right in front of him the entire time. Junpei convinces himself that the conditions are perfect and that with just a little more effort, he can finally kill the monster, leaving him feeling like he has no choice now. He right away stops himself and thinks he needs to quit before going any further. Junpei warns himself not to do anything reckless, telling himself to focus on escaping and maybe reach the next level where there could be weaker enemies he can safely fight. Then another thought cuts in and pushes back against that fear. A cruel memory surfaces as he recalls being told that once he truly understood the situation he was in, he would finally see those empty words had all been meaningless lies. Junpei questions Noriko's true intentions and wonders if fear for her own survival pushed her into using him to protect herself among the strong. Even so, he admits he still does not know whether everything Noriko told him until now had been lies or not. In the darkness, he concludes that regardless of everything else, one undeniable fact remains, and that from her point of view, her choice had been the right one. Junpei erupts in anger and disbelief, as if scolding himself for even entertaining such a broken, self-defeating line of thought. He bitterly rejects the idea that reaching the next level could be any safer, calling that hope a sick joke if it is even possible at all. Junpei sees that he has no power, no equipment, and nothing to rely on, but he still decides that if even the slightest chance of victory exists, he has to take it. Panicking but forcing himself onward, Junpei decides he has to seize whatever opening he can get. He squares off against the skeletal monster and approaches it despite the overwhelming danger. Junpei studies the creature's space in silence and steels himself as the pressure between them grows heavier. Hearing its eerie laugh, Junpei urges it to come closer and tells himself he only needs to lure it in a little more. The instant the distance closes, Junpei moves and commits to the attack at exactly the right moment. He lunges in and slams down with everything he has, trying to end it in one decisive blow. Mid-attack, Junpei all of a sudden realizes something is wrong as a sharp counter cuts through his momentum. His body is violently thrown back while the skeletal enemy remains at the center of the destruction, showing it endured the blow. Through the shock, Junpei realizes in disbelief that his attack had been completely nullified. The skeletal figure calls Junpei's planned attack shameful, and Junpei is knocked backward before he can recover. The magical effect on her grows harder to contain. The No-Life King looms over him from the center of the wreckage, showing it stayed in control even after taking the hit. Junpei all of a sudden remembers the warning that this was the No-Life King's weakness because it could only nullify attacks that it recognized. He realizes that, in other words, an unexpected strike could slip past that defense. The insight lands all at once, and he understands that if the blow is truly unforeseen, the monster will not be able to nullify it. Injured and shaken, Junpei stares ahead and sees the remains of his attack scattered around him as the realization sinks in. He judges that the earlier chaos in the huge blast probably sent countless fragments flying, and if one of them pierced the monster's body, it could have been dragged or pinned onto the spike-like terrain. Looking at the stuck remains, Junpei guesses a few others must have died the same way, then realizes with disbelief that he was the one who actually pulled it off despite surviving only because of the so-called safe zone. Still stunned and half convinced it was impossible, Junpei can only repeat to himself that he really did it. As Junpei stands there in shock, something all of a sudden bursts into his body, and he freezes as the impact hits him without warning. He stares at himself in alarm and realizes that something had just entered his body, leaving him confused about what had happened. A status window appears before him, and Junpei turns toward it in stunned silence as he tries to understand the change. Looking over the display, he begins to understand that the screen is showing his information, including his name, empty job class, high level, and a growing total of status points and experience. As the numbers keep climbing, Junpei can only react in amazement while realizing that his points are still increasing. The status screen confirms his current condition as Takeda Junpei with no job, level 178, 885 status points, basic combat stats, and the appraisal skill at ultra grade with 10 slots remaining. Junpei focuses on the total of 885 status points and anxiously wonders how he is even supposed to assign that many points to his stats. As he stands near the remains in the labyrinth, he recalls the explanation that he could gain abilities by defeating enemies and taking their skills. Facing a grotesque severed monster head, Junpei hesitates and wonders if he only needs to touch it, then reaches out and makes contact. In response, 2 reward-like cards appear before him, showing an item drop for a 41 Magnum revolver and a skill card granting resistance to abnormalities. Junpei stares at the 2 cards in disbelief and realizes there are actually guns in this world, then nervously thinks that this could at least help him survive the dungeon. As he examines the first card, Junpei understands that the revolver was likely brought here from another world or somewhere else entirely. The item materializes in his hand, and Junpei receives the 41 Magnum revolver in a flash. Looking at the second card, he notices it grants resistance to abnormalities, and another item appears, making him realize there is still one more reward. The new card reveals an item called Flesh of the Undead, presented as a rare treasure with a disturbing appearance. Junpei forces a shaky smile as he realizes that combining resistance to abnormalities with this item might truly give him a way to escape the dungeon, and he thinks the timing could not be better. With tense anticipation, he compares the grotesque item card and the skill card while his expression hardens with uneasy resolve. The card transforms in his hands, and the grotesque lump becomes a real object as Junpei grips it directly. Holding the foul mass in front of him, Junpei stares at it in revulsion and wonders in disbelief whether it is really something he can eat. A prompt appears asking whether he will abandon his humanity, and after a brief, sweating hesitation, Junpei chooses no. Junpei stares at his status and notices his skill slots drop to 5 as he nervously checks the result of using the card. He realizes his stats now show appraisal and only 10 skill slots remaining, and the discovery leaves him wide-eyed with shock. As he wonders if this is how to use it, Junpei confirms that his skills now include ultra-grade appraisal and resistance to all abnormalities, with 9 slots left. Sweating, Junpei admits he has no idea what waits on the next level, but he warns himself that he cannot afford to let his guard down. Looking at the grotesque flesh again, he reasons that although there is some hope of escape, going in with his current odds is too risky, so he focuses on the option to abandon his humanity. The atmosphere grows increasingly difficult to manage. On the verge of getting sick, he desperately orders himself not to lose control and forces himself to endure it. As he struggles through the ordeal, Junpei recalls Kido, Noriko, and the others betraying him and throwing him into the labyrinth to die. Clinging to that anger, he remembers their betrayal as utterly unforgivable and keeps going despite the revulsion. Their mocking smiles flood his mind, and the memory hardens his hatred even further. Junpei throws his head back as tears stream down his face, forcing himself through the unbearable ordeal with raw desperation. He glares ahead with shaking fury, his expression hardening as hatred overwhelms his revulsion. A memory flashes of him clutching at his chest in shock while a dark, monstrous presence looms beside him, reviving the terror of that betrayal. Another memory follows as a hand grips a revolver and the names Kido and Noriko resurface, reminding him exactly who led him into this nightmare. Driven by rage, Junpei lunges forward and vows that he will tear them all apart, while his status confirms his new abilities and the weapon now in his possession. Elsewhere, a maid-like woman coldly says she understands how things came to this, while a man above her lets out a faint reaction and she flatly says he should just kill her already. The man smirks and remarks that she is extraordinary while calling her by name, clearly intrigued by her response. He admits he is genuinely curious about how far Junpei can go in the dungeon, while she repeatedly says he should just kill her, showing only numb resignation. The man leans forward with a crazed grin and repeats that he wants to see how far Junpei will make it in the dungeon. Back in the labyrinth, Junpei faces a grotesque horned monster and charges into battle with the revolver in hand, meeting the threat head-on. Junpei raises his weapon and activates Appraisal, locking onto the monster with sharp focus. The target is identified as a mammoth beetle, a danger level, a high-ranked bug monster with a heavy shell and long horns that charges mindlessly until either it or its opponent falls. Junpei realizes that boosting his speed was the right decision. As the beetle tears through the area with a deadly charge, Junpei concludes that any direct hit would have killed him, and that his speed is the only reason he can evade it in time. Holding the old letter, Junpei figures he owes this chance to survive to the old man who left it behind. A grinning figure mockingly calls out to Junpei, says they finally have a hero who might escape the undead king, and asks him to take down this floor's level 5 boss. The figure explains that the terrifying tank-like beetle is this floor's boss, and warns that its defense is so absurdly high that it just keeps smashing through everything. He adds that Junpei might survive 1 or 2 charges with careful dodging, but defeating the monster while avoiding its attacks is basically hopeless. Waving casually, the figure tells Junpei that his time is up, urges him to stick to the original plan and run, then says goodbye and hopes they meet again if Junpei survives farther down. Junpei grins fiercely and decides that if he wants to survive, escaping here sounds like a solid plan. Junpei decides that if he does nothing but run, the dungeon will keep him trapped forever, and that is exactly why he has to stop fleeing. With the revolver raised near his face, Junpei vows to seize every last chance to grow stronger. 10 hours later, Junpei stands before the mammoth beetle again, still confronting the monster with grim determination. He coldly decides that the beetle's only real advantage is its absurd defense as he keeps the revolver trained on it. After hitting it several times, he confirms that even repeated shots still cannot break through. As the beetle lunges forward, he chooses to fall back to his safe zone instead of meeting the attack head-on. He snaps open the revolver and starts reloading with practiced urgency. Junpei tells himself to wait for his mana to recover as he finishes reloading. The moment he is ready, he fires at the beetle again, determined not to let up. Junpei settles into a relentless rhythm, repeating the same cycle over and over without hesitation. Junpei all of a sudden realizes he might be able to exploit this enemy too, and how simple the idea is catches even him off guard. 70 hours later, the mammoth beetle finally collapses, proving Junpei's long war of attrition has at last broken it. Seeing the giant creature finished, Junpei admits the endless grind had been wearing him down, but at last the fight is over. Standing over the fallen boss, Junpei calmly says he should see what rewards it dropped. The beetle leaves behind 2 rewards, a rare mammoth beetle flesh skill card that can be eaten, and a legendary unique armor item that greatly boosts defense. As he checks his status and the rewards, Junpei dismisses defense as useless for his style and reluctantly decides he will eat the flesh instead. Holding the strange food in his hand, Junpei admits this outcome is not what he expected and hesitates, wondering what he should really do next. A disturbing figure presses him by asking whether he plans to escape, and coldly notes that he has already made his choice, turning the moment deeply uncomfortable. Junpei silently heads for the door with a hardened expression, leaving the tense exchange behind and moving on without wavering. The instant he steps outside, Junpei is stunned to find a safe zone right nearby, and the sight leaves him speechless. Junpei comes face to face with a monstrous 3-headed beast, and the sudden threat makes the air tense at once. Keeping his eyes on the enemy, Junpei activates Appraisal to learn what he is dealing with. The creature is identified as Cerberus, a lower-ranked magical beast with dog-like intelligence, no understanding of human speech, brutal physical attacks, and enough toughness to shrug off ordinary weapons while roaming dungeons in search of prey. After reading the result, Junpei is briefly stunned, then bursts into laughter as the absurdity of the enemy's rank sinks in. Junpei admits he does not fully understand the ranking description and brushes the letter grade off as a stupid system. As he keeps reading, Junpei notices the word letter and starts piecing together what the ranking format actually means. He quickly concludes that putting a mythological monster like this in front of him is insane, and says only an idiot would fight it head-on. He realizes he can combine retrieve with appraisal, and that discovery right away sharpens his thinking. Watching Cerberus, Junpei judges that its blinding speed and vicious bite would make a direct fight completely one-sided, and he notes that even retreating into the safe zone would not fully protect him from ranged attacks. He warns himself to be especially careful if the beast takes 5 steps back, recognizing that movement as the sign of an incoming attack. Junpei breaks into loud laughter, saying the whole situation is unbelievably stupid and that there is no other way to describe it. Even so, he quickly orders himself to find a way out, admitting that while he might have a slim chance if he can somehow run, luck will have to be on his side. With a strained grin, Junpei realizes this monster would give a massive amount of experience, and it feels as if fortune has all of a sudden turned toward him. Staring at Cerberus, Junpei admits he does not know whether he can match its speed or whether his idea will even work, but he decides he has to test it. Junpei takes his first step and decides to measure his own speed before anything else. As the distance opens between them, Junpei all of a sudden explodes forward in a blur and rockets across the ruined field. He whips past the charging beast at extreme speed, cutting sharply around Cerberus without stopping. Sweat pouring down his face, Junpei forces himself onward and declares that his 1390 agility is not just for show. After confirming the difference in speed, Junpei decides this can work and realizes he is fast enough to pull it off. With fierce confidence, Junpei calls the beast toward him and vows that he is going to crush it completely. Cerberus all of a sudden unleashes a terrifying howl, and Junpei can only stare in shock as he tries to understand what the monster is doing. The howl slams into him at once, and Junpei's body locks up as he falls backward, unable to respond. In a panic, Junpei realizes something is terribly wrong and struggles to understand what just hit him. The monster's skill is revealed as Dead Howling, a magic-infused roar that inflicts fear and paralysis on lower-level targets. Junpei curses the unexpected attack and realizes that although his arms and legs are completely frozen, his resistance to abnormalities is still letting him move his head. With Cerberus closing in, Junpei desperately orders his body to move, but nothing answers. As the beast looms over him, Junpei keeps screaming at himself in his mind, frantically urging his body to move before it is too late. A desperate idea hits him as he realizes that if his resistance is still working, then the fight is not over yet. He decides that if he can send a huge shock through his brain, he might be able to break the status effect completely. Junpei lets out a grim laugh in front of Cerberus, his fear twisting into reckless resolve as he prepares to bet everything on that plan. Junpei grits his teeth through the agony and realizes he has only just begun to experience that overwhelming pain. Cerberus closes in with its jaws spread wide, ready to attack him. The beast bites down, and the impact sends a brutal shock through Junpei's body. As blood spills from his mouth, Junpei realizes the paralysis has lifted and declares that his status is finally cleared. Seizing the opening, Junpei thrusts his hand toward the monster's mouth and fiercely taunts it to bite him again. The clash erupts into motion as Junpei throws himself into the counterattack at close range. He staggers while choking and bleeding, but even then he forces himself to stay upright and keep moving. In the middle of unbearable agony, Junpei realizes the sensation is nothing but pain, and he bitterly asks why he has to suffer like this. Then, the pain is drowned out by a rising violent impulse, as a relentless urge to destroy floods his mind again and again. That dark impulse sharpens into clear targets, driving Junpei to think of destroying everyone, Noriko, Kido and his friends, and everything inside the dungeon. Junpei hunches over alone on the broken stone floor, clutching himself as the violent urge raging inside him grows harder to contain. The interaction turns into something neither wanted. As one of Cerberus's heads hangs in front of him, Junpei coldly wonders what effect it had and addresses the creature as a myth-class monster. He calmly continues, as if speaking to an equal, and shifts the pressure back onto the beast. Junpei asks whether it is really fine for the monster to keep standing there, and the nearest head jerks in sudden alarm. He reveals why, with grim confidence, telling Cerberus that he is standing at death's door. The moment becomes overwhelming and emotionally difficult. A status panel identifies him as Takeda Junpei, a level 312 skill hunter, and he grins as he realizes that after eating part of the monster, even a myth-ranked Cerberus could be brought down. With a revolver in hand, Junpei declares that this is no time to play around, even as he admits he does not know whether Cerberus can recover from the damage. Looking at the beast's wavering condition, he concludes that ordinary attacks will not be enough anymore. Junpei raises his hand and coldly suggests trying something on the monster. He says that since it is a dog, its sense of smell should be especially sharp. Junpei explains that he will drip his blood directly into its nose and trigger the poison effect. He right away flips open the revolver's cylinder and prepares the next move with steady hands. Holding something in one hand, Junpei crouches among the ruins and quickly sets his plan in place. A burst ignites instantly, and the attack lands exactly where he aimed it. With a fierce grin, Junpei declares that the inside of the monster's nose should be burning now. As Cerberus reacts violently, Junpei notes with satisfaction that it is a good response and says he wants to hear it cry out now. The huge beast convulses in place while Junpei watches in cold silence and keeps his finger ready. After the monster falls, reward cards appear, including beast flesh, dead howling, and a beast fang. Junpei looks at the reward flesh with disgust, saying trash is still trash and forcing himself to eat it even though he expects it to taste awful. The curse makes her situation increasingly unstable. Reviewing his status, Junpei realizes his level has risen sharply, and his no-life king attribute can now turn his bones, flesh, and bodily fluids into a powerful neurotoxin, and he gladly decides the fang can serve as a knife. Elsewhere, a pale woman reminds Chen that he forgot to tell Junpei how to use the box, and Chen all of a sudden realizes the mistake. Chen casually calls out to her and tells her to go explain the box to Junpei. When she asks whether he will kill her if she goes, Chen nervously replies that he will think about it. As she leaves, Chen remarks that he likes her outfit and says she would look especially striking dressed that way, and she coolly says that settles it. Back at the labyrinth entrance, Junpei struggles to swallow the flesh, calls it disgusting, bitterly notes someone once claimed beetles were delicious, and then wonders what the next floor will be. He steps through the doorway and stops when an unexpectedly open landscape spreads out before him. Staring ahead in shock, Junpei realizes the place looks exactly like the outside world and can only hesitate in disbelief. Junpei scans the open landscape and wonders if this entire floor might actually be a safe zone. Still on edge, he questions what is happening and realizes there are no enemies in sight. A mysterious woman all of a sudden appears before him, and Junpei startles as she begins to identify him. She formally addresses him as Takeda Junpei-sama, confirming she knows exactly who he is. Junpei is thrown off as he realizes she does not seem to be a monster at all, but an ordinary human woman, though her unusual outfit keeps him wary. The woman calmly introduces herself and says she is pleased to meet him. She reveals her name is Chenny and explains that she serves the one called God. Junpei right away links that title to the deranged man from before and bluntly asks if she means that crazy figure. Chenny agrees and describes Hidari-sama as deeply disturbed, disgusting, selfish, hideous, sordid, ugly, and corrupt, while Junpei awkwardly tells her he understands. She reassures Junpei that everything he says will remain secret between them, and he quickly insists those insults came from her, not him. Chenny stops wandering off topic and tells Junpei she will explain the basic guidance he never received. She summons a box before him and explains that by calling one like this, he can store and retrieve whatever loot he gains. Chenny explains that everyone in this world has a personal box, and its size and shapeshift with the owner's magical power, letting strong users store almost anything, alive or not. She adds that anything resisting cannot be forced inside, and Junpei realizes capturing monsters would mean subduing them first as he nervously asks how to summon his. When Junpei calls for the box, it appears in a far more menacing form, and Chenny dryly remarks that this is his box. Junpei stares at the savage-looking container and cautiously asks if it can be used in combat. Chenny replies that under normal circumstances that depends on the user, but no one would usually waste it as mere storage. Chenny declares the tutorial over and asks if he has any questions. Junpei wonders if he should ask about her outfit, then instantly loses his nerve. Before he can speak, Chenny says she noticed his uncomfortable stare the whole time and asks why he dressed her that way if he objected to it, leaving Junpei stunned. Chenny all of a sudden vanishes from sight and says that if he wants to leave, he can figure it out himself from here, while he stares in confusion. Junpei thinks she clearly has serious issues and mutters that this kind of behavior must be normal for someone working for that side. He spots a letter left behind, picks it up, and pauses when he realizes it is addressed to him. A bizarre man appears laughing, cheerfully greeting Junpei like a brother and asking how the fight with Cerberus went. The man explains that reaching this floor means Junpei has arrived somewhere people actually live, leaving him stunned. He reveals that the whole floor is a safe zone and that some who endured endless life and death battles chose to stay there and live out their days in peace. He asks what Junpei plans to do and says Junpei could also choose a small village and settle there for the rest of his life. Still grinning unnervingly, the man declares that he hates dealing with people and loves being alone, yet says he will keep moving forward anyway. He abruptly says farewell and remarks that they may meet again if fate allows, while Junpei forces a faint, uneasy smile. After the man leaves, Junpei quietly concludes that a total lunatic really does live on this floor. Junpei notices a woman nearby and wonders if she is one of the villagers, surprised to find another person here. The girl casually greets him and points out that this is their first meeting. She notices he came from that direction and concludes that he must have descended from the upper levels. Junpei hesitantly asks who she is. She introduces herself as Katarina, says she lives in a village in this floor's valley, and warmly tells him it is nice to meet him. Junpei nervously introduces himself as Junpei Takeda, and Katarina brightly repeats his name with easy familiarity. Junpei notes that there really is a village here, and though he still cannot fully let his guard down, he admits she seems far more normal and approachable than the last woman. Katarina all of a sudden calls out to Junpei and says this may be abrupt, but she has a favor to ask. With eager urgency, she asks him to accompany her. In the very next instant, the air turns painfully awkward as she hurriedly corrects herself in a fluster, while Junpei freezes in blank shock. Katarina quickly apologizes and asks to explain, while Junpei buries his face in his hand and gloomily thinks that every woman in this world asks for something bizarre. She insists that she is completely serious and says the situation is urgent. Katarina asks if they can talk while walking and urges Junpei to come with her. Junpei reluctantly agrees, and Katarina responds with visible relief and gratitude. With a bright smile, Katarina introduces herself properly as Katarina, says she lives in the valley village on this floor, and tells him it is nice to meet him. Junpei gets ready to introduce himself to this place. As they move through the area, Katarina explains that their village began with only a couple of people, and after several decades it has grown to around 50 residents. She adds that because of that, she really only knows what happens inside their own village. Crouching near the ground beside Junpei, Katarina admits she knows almost nothing about the outside world, but says she has heard that children born between close relatives can have abnormalities. Hearing that, Junpei falls into serious thought and wonders if she means recessive gene mutations caused by consanguineous marriage. Katarina explains that the only outsiders here are adventurers, and says their village has been left with no choice but to seek help from them in a deeply unsettling way. Junpei says he understands what she means, aside from her wording, while an armed villager grows tense and Katarina hesitates. As goblins begin appearing throughout the area, Junpei asks what is happening while the threat becomes obvious at once. Katarina cheerfully explains that they are hunting, and Junpei realizes this is essential to the village's survival, even though the creatures look like ordinary weak monsters to him. While the villagers ready their weapons, Junpei points out that this entire floor was supposed to be a safe zone. He reasons that monsters should not be able to spawn here, but then comes the explanation that the floor's safe zone effect has weakened. Because of that decline, countless weak monsters have been able to enter, and the villagers surround them to fight back. A villager charges forward and declares that these monsters naturally became their source of food, as the others rush in after him. In the middle of the assault, a goblin strikes back and one of the hunters is all of a sudden wounded, shocking the rest. Seeing the injury, Katarina tells Junpei that his friend seems badly hurt, but Junpei stays calm and says it is fine. A villager explains that, even though the floor's recovery effect is weak, the wounded man would not die from an injury like that. Katarina says she is about to lure some monsters over, and Junpei asks what exactly she plans to do. Junpei realizes she intended this from the start, and Katarina calmly confirms it. Katarina says she wants to see how capable Junpei's bloodline would be, making the moment sharply uncomfortable. Junpei reacts awkwardly and tries to brush it off with a confused comment. Even while admitting he has no reason to cooperate, Junpei grows curious about how strong ordinary monsters are, and decides this is the perfect chance to test himself. In an instant, Junpei wipes out the goblins around him, leaving the ground covered in corpses as Katarina watches from behind. Junpei flatly notes that it only took a few seconds. Katarina stares in amazement and showers him with excited praise. Overcome with excitement, Katarina calls Junpei overwhelmingly strong and addresses him with alarming familiarity, leaving him speechless and uneasy. Katarina moves close and excitedly tells Junpei that he seems suitable for her plans. Then the moment turns deeply inappropriate as she bluntly suggests discussing it further later. The others casually say they will leave the rest to Katarina, while Junpei looks flustered and the atmosphere turns even stranger. Katarina all of a sudden regains composure, announces that she is activating her skill called Butchery, and kneels beside a fallen monster as Junpei watches. She repeats the skill name as it activates, and from above the battlefield is shown strewn with monster remains while she keeps working. Several item cards appear at once, each identifying the drops as low-rank monster flesh and noting that most of it is edible if cooked. Seeing the stack of cards, Junpei reacts in shock and realizes there is a staggering amount of meat from all the monsters. When Junpei is left confused, Katarina smiles and explains that handling this is part of her job. A view of the village fields explains that the settlement can only grow crops, and they would suffer severe protein deficiency without meat to make up for it. Katarina admits she has long been told they need protein, but also confesses she is not entirely sure what protein even is. Junpei tells her that he has raised his butchery skill to the highest level and can now use it, but he wants. As Katarina explains that they barely have any protein sources besides animals or plants, and that not even bugs live around here, Junpei falls silent and thinks it through. Junpei grimly realizes that without this meat, the villagers would be in a desperate situation and would likely waste away from malnutrition. Katarina turns to Junpei with bright curiosity and asks what his status looks like. Junpei agrees to show her and brings up his status screen. The others stare at the screen in alarm, struggling to believe what they are seeing. Looking over the display, Junpei explains that he acquired many skills and ended up distributing his points like this, while someone notes that his stats are extremely uneven. Katarina studies the numbers, points out that he focused heavily on speed, and starts asking what happened to his defense. Before she can finish, Katarina all of a sudden grabs his arm and the moment shifts as she tests him directly while Junpei stiffens in surprise. With a calm smile, Katarina reveals that her base attack is 80 and tells the startled Junpei that he has no way out. In the next instant, Junpei is violently slammed to the ground by the force of her move while another villager watches in shock. Katarina smiles warmly and says the villagers truly appreciate him, adding that he even saved them the trouble of drugging his meal. Junpei stares back in shock, locks onto her face, and realizes this cannot be real. He right away activates appraisal on them, despite the blow he just took. The result identifies them as Bali villagers, ordinary humans who settled in the dungeon Bali and survived by preying on unsuspecting adventurers, turning them into food for protein, leaving Junpei stunned as the group closes in. The scene shifts into a rough stone interior with stairs and storage, suggesting he has been taken deeper into their hideout. Junpei notices a grim room lined with tools, hooks, barrels, and heavy equipment, and the silence makes everything feel even more dangerous. He then realizes he has been chained spread eagle on a table, and the restraints make it undeniable that he is completely trapped. As panic rises across his face, Katarina greets him brightly and calls out, "Good morning, my dear." Standing beside a tray of sharp instruments, Katarina cheerfully asks how he likes his new home, making the room feel instantly more disturbing. She apologizes for handcuffing him and claims she will free him soon, but the restraints and bloodstains turn her reassurance ominous. Chained to the table, Junpei forces a strained grin and remarks that she seems unusually cheerful while demanding to know what she plans to do with him. Katarina calmly reminds him of what she said earlier about the villagers lacking protein. As she lifts a large blade over the tools beside him, she explains that they will now rely on him to provide that protein and says that nothing useful from him will be wasted. Junpei freezes in terror as she promises they will take care of him for the rest of his life. Pointing the blade toward his lower body, she says they will start with his legs because, while one regenerates, they can keep using the other. Junpei's face twists in horror as he realizes she was never joking and that the villagers truly prey on adventurers like monsters. Katarina explains that because they are inside a safe zone, even if he loses all 4 limbs, they will grow back, and as long as they keep finding fresh victims, the villagers can keep eating fresh meat. Lifting the blade with a bright smile, she adds that now that he is here, they will no longer need the weak villagers for survival, since his body will be divided among them, and the elderly will be put out of their misery. In the next instant, she brings the blade down, and the room explodes into violent motion as Junpei is struck. Covered in blood, Katarina smiles with relief and says she is glad to have such a young and strong man as her husband. Katarina gives a strained smile, says it must be unbearable, and apologizes while urging Junpei to endure the situation as he trembles in pain. As blood spreads through the room, she coldly explains that there is not enough monster meat to feed everyone, so they have no other choice. When she is done, she declares they will mark his arrival with a meal, leaving his body severely injured. Holding what she took from him, Katarina calmly says she will turn it into soup. She tells Junpei his legs should recover in about 10 days, then adds that she will injure his hands too, because even with one leg gone, she refuses to let him escape. Watching him with unsettling attachment, Katarina says she wants to handle her husband carefully, while Junpei stares back in panic. Holding his severed leg, she says they should get through the night after the banquet, making the moment feel even more disturbing. As the encounter becomes deeply disturbing, she insists that he can leave everything to her and tries to reassure him with the confidence of past experience. With a wide smile, Katarina promises she will make the night memorable, making the room feel even more sickening. Later, with Junpei slumped forward in shock, Katarina turns away and casually says she will be going now. Katarina gently calls Unpei her dear, while he looks back at her through pain and strained confusion. As Junpei hangs his head in the village, Katarina explains that everyone there already knows such behavior would be unforgivable in the outside world. She admits they do not expect forgiveness and says this is simply the only way they can survive. Junpei stares ahead as the awful truth sinks in. The villagers are desperately consuming what they took from him just to stay alive. Katarina smiles apologetically, says that is why she truly feels sorry, and adds that she still hopes they can get along. Junpei coldly thinks that every one of them is deranged, even as he keeps listening. Even so, he admits that from their perspective, they had no choice but to find some way to survive. Lost in the darkness of his thoughts, Junpei concludes that maybe he would have done the same. Katarina cheerfully says, maybe there is still a slight chance they could understand each other, then casually tells him she will see him later. Left shaken and barely able to process any of it, Junpei weakly notices that his body is already starting to recover. Katarina gently asks what is wrong, calling him dear again, and Junpei dodges the issue by saying it is nothing.